Okay, let's get things restarted. Now that people have had the tea break to think about the first half, let's just check. Are there questions from the first half? All right, if not, then let's keep going. So, Roger.
Okay. Is my microphone working? People? Sounds good? Somebody's pointing at, I guess, the lights to make it a little bit... Now somebody's pointing down. I don't know. Ah. Okay, I will let people sort out the lights as they figure it out. Perfect. Okay, so we left off talking about Egypt, and back in January of 2011, January of this year was the last time that we saw that sort of thing in Egypt. There are a lot more people in Egypt using Tor right now. So Libya was the next example. You'll notice that the first couple of examples were 2007 and then 2009, and they're going to get a lot more dense this year because a lot of censorship events have happened this year. So Libya was like Egypt, where they turned off their internet for the most part, but they didn't do it by actually changing the routes. Egypt went to the 5 ISPs and said, please stop advertising your BGP level routing. Please basically take yourself off the internet. Libya just cranked down the amount of bandwidth that it was providing to the point that you couldn't use the network. So it was still there, it was just unusable. And that meant that it wasn't a worthwhile news story, so nobody bothered noticing. So here's a graph of the number of people who were using Tor in Libya. And this is where the Libyan protests started, and then suddenly they turned off the internet for months, and nobody cared. And right about here is when you started reading about Libya in the news again, when they found Gaddafi and changed what sort of government they were having. So there's a little bit of stuff going back. Also, notice that the units here are in hundreds of people. So Libya basically doesn't have an internet to begin with. Another answer there is if you're in Libya and you are actually using the internet, you're using a sat phone that comes out through Italy. So from my perspective, you will look like you have an IP address in Italy as an Italian Tor user, even though you happen to be physically located in Libya using a satellite connection. So we might be missing all of the interesting users here because there aren't that many IP addresses allocated to Libya. And then Syria. So Syria uses an American product called Blue Coat to censor and surveil and monitor their infrastructure. And in June of this year, there was one ISP in Syria that recognized Tor traffic by deep packet inspection. So Tor, once upon a time, Tor sent 2 SSL certificates in each direction. The client sent 2, and the server sent 2. And the goal of that was to be able to establish identity, long-term identity, but also establish an ephemeral session key. So you need a chain of certificates on both sides. The problem with that is that nobody else in the world sends 2 certificates in each direction. So we decided to blend in better. So we start out by having the server send 1 and the client send 0. But you can't actually authenticate very well with that. So we do a TLS renegotiation after we've done that first handshake, and then we send both certificates in both directions. It turns out that if you're watching the SSL handshake on the wire, you can recognize a TLS renegotiation request. And a year or so ago, there was a bug, a flaw found in the TLS protocol that basically everybody who was doing renegotiation was continuing to trust the other side just as they had before the renegotiation, even though now it's a new set of certificates, and you shouldn't move forward the trust you had before to the trust you have now. So there was a flaw in TLS renegotiation which made everybody else in the world stop using it, except Tor, because we didn't bother to upgrade. So Blue Coat was testing out if it's an SSL handshake and renegotiates, then kill it filter. And it was only up for a week. And we spent that week trying to figure out if it was actually happening. And then it disappeared. So the ISP went offline. And when the ISP came back online, it wasn't filtering Tor anymore. So I have no clue. This right here was when it happened. So there was quite a significant effect of censoring Tor at that point. But you'll notice that they stopped after that, and now there are a heck of a lot more people in Syria using Tor. So this is one of the countries that really needs Tor at this point a great deal. I went to Tunisia in October to go to an Arab blogger conference. And I talked to a lot of interesting people from a lot of countries around there. And Saudi Arabia and Syria and Palestine were the places that had the most problems in terms of their adversaries censoring and surveilling things. One of the key things to realize, and this is very hard for the ordinary individuals in these countries, a lot of people look at it as, this website is not censored, therefore it's fine for me to go there. But what you need to realize is censorship and surveillance go together. They're the same infrastructure, they're the same program. So if they have the ability to censor, that means they are surveilling everything, and then they're just choosing what to do after that. So for example, in the case of Syria and Bluecoat, in October, we found actual Bluecoat servers running in Syria, and they were not very well secured, and they had logs of basically every web request made over them. So there were 50 gigabytes of detailed logs of IP address, user agent, what page they asked for, whether it was censored, just gigabytes and gigabytes of this stuff, detailing every user in Syria who accessed every website. And this stuff, first of all, Bluecoat says they don't keep it. Second of all, they didn't secure their servers enough so anybody who wanted to could break in and get it. Bad news if you're from Syria. So I was actually talking to the fellow in Tunisia who is in charge of their internet surveillance and censorship infrastructure. And he said, yes, we do use Smart Filter, and yes, in fact, we just renewed our Smart Filter license, so we'll be paying for it for another year. And then he said, we don't censor the internet at all anymore. There's no censorship, except for government and military and schools, because they want it. So, of course, we still censor them. It was a very weird conversation where he was trying to explain that they were done censoring, except for the people who want it. And I don't know why schools should be in the category of people who want it. I actually went to visit a university in Tunisia. And so in the US, as a computer science student, you talk to a bunch of computer science students, and they say, I wish my classes could be a little bit more hands-on, because they're sick of people teaching theory. They're sick of learning about the theory side, and they want to actually get some computers and use them. In the US, what they mean is, I would like my classes to be more practical. But the people in Tunisia I talked to said, I wish my classes could be more practical, more hands-on. And what they meant was, I wish we could have some computers at this university, so it wasn't just learning about stuff from the theory side. So it was a very, very different perspective than I was used to. One of the things that this fellow operating the Tunisian censorship infrastructure pointed out was the phrase national sovereignty. So Tunisia outsources to a company, he wouldn't tell me which one, but I assume they're in France. There's some company in France that gets to see everything that happens on the Tunisian internet. They get to see every page that the government and military and generals and so on ask for, and they get to decide what the answer is. They can, the general asks for a page, and you can give him a different answer. You can censor him. You can target your censorship. Is this the sort of thing that other governments want to be able to do to Tunisia? So he was really concerned that by outsourcing the surveillance of his entire country's citizens, he's really putting his country at risk. And I think that's a huge thing that they should be thinking more about. So in September of this year, Iran censored Tor again. So this time they did deep packet inspection to look for SSL flows. And then it turns out that we rotate our session certificate every 2 hours, because you're supposed to rotate keys, right? That's what the theory people tell us. So every 2 hours we make a new SSL certificate. And so what Iran did was they looked for SSL handshakes that use a certificate that was born just a few hours ago and expires in exactly 1 year. Let me rephrase that. So ours would expire in as many as 2 hours. So we built them, and then we the lifetime of them was scheduled to be outdated very soon. And nobody in the world except Tor builds SSL certificates that are going to expire in 2 hours. Typically, the lifetime of them is a year or something like that. So they were able to figure out Tor SSL versus normal SSL and filter it. So we fixed that. Now they last for a year, even though we rotate them every 2 hours still. So now you could filter Tor in Iran by saying, is it an SSL connection? If it is the certificate that I see going to expire in exactly 364 days and 23 hours? If so, it's probably Tor. So the bigger lesson here, there are a lot of ways of censoring Tor like this. There are a lot of ways to distinguish between normal SSL from Firefox and Apache and Tor talking to Tor. So we made a list of them a while ago. We made a list of like 30 ways to censor Tor. Should we fix all of them now? Or should we've got the list, we know what they're probably going to do, we know how to fix each of them. Are there any journalists here? Or am I just talking to, I see no hands, okay. Please don't write this in your newspaper. But one of the questions that I have been pondering for a while, nobody who actually runs these firewalls likes censorship. So we actually talked to the people who run the firewall in one of the Middle Eastern countries, and they said, oh yeah, we don't censor Tor because we use Tor. And we don't want to censor it because then we wouldn't be able to use it. So imagine you work for the censorship infrastructure in Iran, and some policy guy says, it's your job to censor Tor this week. So you don't want to get fired, you want to do your job. So you look at Tor and you think about ways of censoring it, and you choose one that, and you choose a way of censoring it that's really easy for us to fix, that really minimizes the long-term damage. Is this happening? I mean, everybody who likes technology hates censorship, is my experience. It's a very unstable situation, though, because all it takes is one other technical guy saying, no, you idiot, this is how you're supposed to do it. So one of the questions here is, what's actually going on inside Iran right now? We've got policy people who make decisions. We've got technical people who try to follow them. How many decisions are made on each side? I really don't know what's going on in there. But the facts are that they have censored us in ways that are quite easy to fix. So in this case, I wouldn't say we're prepared for this one, but it was one of the first things we checked. We said, if we make our SSL certificates last longer, do we stop getting censored? Yes, we do. OK, we're going to fix it. And the extra fun part here, in the case of the Diffie-Hellman parameter and this SSL certificate, the way the TLS protocol works, the client goes to the server and says, I want to do TLS. And the server says, here's my SSL certificate. And that's where the censorship happens. So if you change what the server says, no more censorship. The result of that is we need the servers to upgrade, but we don't need the clients to upgrade. And that means that we fixed this one in the course of 24 hours. So here's the January one I was talking about. And right there is when they censored it the second time. Notice that we didn't actually lose that many users, and we had to fix out 18 hours after they started the censorship. And because only the relays had to upgrade, it wasn't a matter of how do you get a new version of Tor to all these people on modems who don't know how to check the signature. It was just get 500 or 1,000 relays to upgrade, and then you're in business. So this is a fun graph of the number of people in Iran using Tor. We're up at the 60,000 or 40,000 mark. And this is probably pretty conservative. I would not be shocked to learn that the number of people in Iran running Tor today are actually 10 times this number. Because this assumes number of Tor clients who are running 24 hours a day. And very few people in Iran run their Tor client for 24 hours a day. Most of them walk into an internet cafe, set it up for 20 minutes, use it, walk out. So if that's true, then we should multiply these numbers by 24 times 3 or something to get a better sense of the actual number of distinct users going on.
How are you collecting the statistics?
How are we collecting the statistics? So when your Tor client starts, it connects to one of the Tor relays to fetch a copy of the network consensus. And the Tor relay says, I saw somebody fetching the network consensus from this IP address. Every relay has a GeoIP database that turns an address into a country. And they remember locally, I saw somebody from Egypt asking for the consensus. And then at the 24-hour mark, they publish an aggregated set of, I saw this many from this country, this many from this country, and so on. And then we collect all of those and add them all up to get answers like this.
So what assurance do I have that you are not harvesting this information?
That I am not what? Say that again?
How do I have that assurance that Tor is not harvesting this information and selling it off?
Yep. So the answer,
Is there a bad Bob or a,
yep,
it's not my secret Bob, that kind of?
yes. So we know that you are using Tor. By we, I mean the relay. And the relay doesn't tell us who you are. But even if it did, we would end up with a list of all the people who use Tor, but we have no idea what they do. All we know is that they bootstrapped into the Tor network. They learned what the list of relays was. We don't know what their circuit was, and we don't know which website they asked for. So we're not...
What worries me in this context is that the sample size of the users that you have in many of these countries is still very small. And in a large population,
Yes.
if you can narrow down to that small set,
Yes.
that is equivalent to narrowing down to 5 people example which we were talking about.
Yep. Yep. So
There is a problem then, right?
yes. So in the case of Iran right here, we've got hundreds of thousands of people using Tor. So the fact that you were a Tor user is not so bad. And we'll get a little bit more into this in a bit. But one of the reasons why it's not so bad is the average user in Iran is using it to get to Facebook because it got blocked. They're not a dissident. They're not saying, I want my government to change. They're instead saying, for some reason, my government filtered my webcomics, and I want to read my webcomics. And there's this program called Tor that lets me read the webcomics. So almost all of these 60,000 people are ordinary citizens who are forced by their government to get around the censorship. And that means that if you find a Tor user in Iran, it's probably an ordinary citizen who is reading his webcomics. It's probably not an activist that you should arrest. So that's true for Iran, but let's go back to Libya. There are not very many people there. And because Libya's network connection is so slow, you have to really want to be using it. You're not going to be using it to read webcomics. And that's potentially really bad news. And there are other countries like Sudan where the numbers are even less. So it really, part of our goal is to build a set of users in all these countries who are using it for a lot of different reasons so that you can have cover traffic. Another example there, another answer that's a better answer. So I talked about bridge relays. If you're using a bridge relay, you don't show up in these statistics because we don't know what the list of bridges is, or at least not very easily. And if you're using a bridge, then the bad guys who are looking for connections in the Tor network can't figure out even that you are using Tor. So this goes back to the Syria example I was talking about in the first half of the talk, where if you are worried about the Syrian government and you're connecting to the Tor network, then, as you say, you should very rightly be saying, they know I'm using Tor, is that bad? And the answer right now is a lot of people use Tor in Syria, so it's not that bad. But if you want to fix it, you should be using a bridge so that your first hop between you and the Tor network is not to a known Tor address. And that will make you safer. It will mean that you won't show up in these statistics. So even if we were making and selling lists of Tor users, and let me back up even farther. The risk that you should worry about is not the Tor guys are lying to you and actually they're building a list of the users and giving it away. The risk you should worry about is the government of Syria makes a list of the relays and watches their network connection for people who are connecting to them. So then they can enumerate their own set of users without having to worry about breaking into us or whether we're trustworthy. The network, see if I can keep this on for longer this time. The network itself gives away this information. And so it isn't a matter of how much do you trust the Tor guys. We need to make it that this sort of information is not that scary to give to anybody. So we actually collect all this information I'm giving you the drafts for. We publish it. It's all publicly available. And the reason for that is we don't want to have any information that other people would find useful in a way that they would try to break into us or something like that. So we believe it's safe so much that we give it out to everybody. And we have a paper at the workshop on ethics of computer security research last year on here's exactly how we collect the information and why we think it's safe and what gets published. And I would love it if people would read that paper and break it for us. Because, for example, we do not use differential privacy, even though maybe we should. The algorithms are much simpler than that. We take the number of people from each country that we see, we round it up to the nearest multiple of 8, and we publish it. So part of the challenge with differential privacy is we want to give you a new data set every day, and we don't know what the future data sets are. And that makes differential privacy end up making such vague numbers. We'll be publishing 400,000 users in Syria today, negative 100,000 users in Syria tomorrow. And they will, in fact, be differentially private, but they won't be useful. So there's certainly a challenge there in terms of getting differential privacy to be actually useful to us. So far, so good?
The bridge points idea is that you are giving, are you actually putting your organization's machines in the systems, or are you using the client systems as temporary?
When you
I am downloading the Tor client, am I becoming a bridge at some point for someone else?
Not by default. So when you download the Tor client, it comes with a GUI called Vidalia, and you can click on sharing, and then you'll have a choice. There are 4 things to click. The first one is I just want to be a relay. I just want to be a client. I'm just a user. I don't want to relay anything. That's the default. The second one is I want to be a non-exit relay. I didn't talk about exit policies, but I probably should. Every public relay has an exit policy that specifies which addresses and ports it's willing to connect to on the rest of the internet. So the default exit policy, for example, allows web browsing, but doesn't allow BitTorrent or port 25, so you can't send email over Tor. And it's not because Tor is great for spammers. It's because it's a lot easier to have a conversation saying, no, we don't allow port 25, than it is to say, let's talk about the economics of why spammers are successful and why Tor doesn't help them. So every relay has an exit policy, and many relays are non-exits. They just want to be either the first hop or the second hop in the path. They don't want to be the third hop because if you connect to Yahoo, for example, and you send a mail that upsets somebody, then they track it back to the third relay IP address and they say, you sent this mail. And then the answer is, no, 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 let me teach you about Tor. Some ISPs that works fine, some ISPs, they turn you off. So you can be a non-exit relay. The third option is being a default exit relay. And the fourth option is I want to be a bridge. So by default, you're just a client. But the more people that we can convince to click one of those other buttons, the bigger and more diverse the Tor network becomes. There are open research questions on can we turn everybody into a bridge by default? One of the things that would be great to do, as a client, you should keep track of how stable you are and whether you are reachable or you're behind a NAT and how much bandwidth you have. And if you've been around for a few weeks, maybe you should auto-upgrade, or maybe you should pop up a little thing to the user saying, looks like you would be very helpful. Do you mind if I use your computer to save people in the Middle East? And if you phrase it correctly, save the world, yes, no, then maybe they would go for it. But yeah, there's certainly a question, how much of this do we automatically choose for the users versus how much do we make sure that they should volunteer for this? Even if we automatically upgraded everybody to be bridges or non-exit relays, we would still end up with a bottleneck as the third hop for the exit relays, because I don't want to automatically sign you up as an exit relay. That's going to make you very surprised one day. But that means that we'll be low on capacity for the third hop, even if we can make a lot of the other ones. Yes?
Weren't you saying before you're proposing advertising now to the user of saving the world, but weren't you saying before different users need different advertising? So you should actually watch the web pages that the user visits and and then tune your advertising appropriately?
Yes. A slight variation on that would be to watch how much load they put on the Tor network and say, you appear to be file sharing. The way that the Tor network works is by people who put load also volunteering to handle load. So I could imagine some variations on that. It seems like, in general, it is too evil for us to want to do. But yeah, maybe worth thinking about. It would not harm the privacy much, as long as the notes that the Tor client takes locally are not damaging if you break in and get to see it. So, for example, I would not want to write down, seems like an active Syrian dissident in the state file. That seems like it would be bad news later. So far, so good?
But the issue is exactly that. The issue is that what you decide as your metric of evilness.
Metric of?
Evilness.
Evilness, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's a metric that call is yours, right?
Yep.
So that threshold may be adequate for some, may not be adequate for some.
Which is why we need to choose it very conservatively.
Exactly. So how do I as a user get an assurance about that?
So the more general question you're asking is, how can I trust Tor? How do I know how to trust this? So I gave a talk I went to a computer hacker conference in the Netherlands a few years ago, and there were 5,000 people there, and they were all computer security practical experts. And I ended up doing 3 talks in 3 days, and I got asked that question a lot. And I tried 2 different answers on people. The first answer I tried was, it's open source, it's open design, you don't have to trust me, you can look at it, you can decide for yourself. They really didn't like that answer. I was surprised, because as an open source guy, I figure you give people the design, you come to IndoCrypt and you talk about it, and the more open you are, the more... Oh, well, you can build it. That's fine.
I don't know how to build it.
We give you documentation to build it. Let me rephrase. There are people out there, if they care, who can take those steps. If you do not care, or if you are not skilled enough to be able to do it, you either have to trust us, or you have to find somebody that you can trust. But it doesn't have to be us. You can go to your friend, the security guy, and say, can you take a look at this? Can you help me build it? Can you improve the confidence that I have in whether this is safe? So I agree with you that it will never be perfect. But the second answer that I tried giving people at this conference of computer security experts was, no, dude, trust me, it's fine. That actually worked great. Because in the first case, they were thinking, Roger is trying to give me a hint that there's a problem and he's not allowed to talk about it. And in the second case, they heard, I am part of your community. Here I am being understandable. Here I am presenting. Here I am at the conference. They chose me as a presenter. Therefore, this is safe. Which is a horrible answer from a security perspective, but it worked. So there's an answer there in terms of the social interactions and how much, what sort of answers you can trust here. But in terms of openness, I believe that providing as much detail as you can to as many people as you can about how to trust these things is going to ultimately be the best way to make people able to trust it. So how do you know that you can trust Tor? The answer is we are as open as we can possibly be, which I think is a lot better than a lot of the other systems out there. So this was Iran. There are actually 2 other steps that we're still investigating that I'm not sure what's going on. So in September, Iran filtered Tor. And then in October, I started getting emails from people in Iran saying, it works, but it's slower than it was. So the conspiracy theorist in me said, the next step they have taken is they do DPI to recognize Tor flows, and they don't cut them, they just throttle them. They just give you less bandwidth. So if you're doing normal SSL, maybe you can get 60 kilobytes a second, but if you're doing Tor, then you only get 20 kilobytes a second. And this is a way to discourage people from using Tor without making us actually fix it, because it's harder for us to tell whether they're actually doing this in the first place. And we still don't know whether they're doing it. My most recent guess is that they're not. It's just that the Tor network got a bit slower, or maybe Iran's network got slower in October. There are a lot of variables here in terms of actually learning what's going on. China, on the other hand, in October, we started getting reports that bridges that had been given out only to one person, he would use the bridge, and then between 1 and 10 minutes after he used it, it would get filtered. And what was happening, we're still looking into this, what seemed to be happening was China was DPIing for SSL flows and then doing an active follow-up SSL handshake with everything that it saw and saying, this one speaks the Tor protocol, I'm going to filter it. So at that point, it's not about how do I change my SSL certificate, how do I blend in better, because they were actually actively following up on everything that looked like it might have been Tor to actually interact with it and see how it interacted. So if that turns out to be what they're doing, they've taken a huge step forward in the arms race. And the answer to that is that we need passwords on bridges. So in order to do the SSL handshake and have it talk Tor to you, you need to provide the password and prove that you know it. There are variations on that, and they all are horrible from a usability perspective. So I'm hoping that turns out not to be what they're doing. Right now, the active probing is happening, but they're not filtering anything. So we've got a chance to look at the SSL flows and find out whether we can change things a little bit so that we don't actually trigger active probing. We have another project we've been working on called obfusc proxy, which is so the general goal is that we would like to provide alternate transport mechanisms. So you could look like SSL in your Tor traffic, or you could look like Skype or lots of other things, and whatever people want to build, we can use that transport so that we can look like anything we want to look like. The obfusc proxy protocol is very simple. Basically, the first 16 bytes on each side are random bytes, and then each side XORs them together, and that's the key that you use out of the gate for some sort of AES encryption. The result of that is there are no recognizable bytes in your protocol at all, so DPI doesn't work anymore. It's not perfect because you can still look at timing and volume signatures to say, even though that's encrypted, it looks like you're doing BitTorrent, or it looks like you're doing web browsing, or it looks like you're doing Tor. But at least they're going to have to take a big step forward as well. And the obligatory local graph of Tor use in India for the past year. If anybody can tell me what happened in May or October, I'd be curious to know. Certainly there were 10,000 people who suddenly decided it was worthwhile to use Tor for a little while, and then they decided it wasn't necessary after that. Maybe we can chat afterwards about what sort of interesting political or social things happened in your country over the past year. Okay, so let's take a step further back and start thinking about what sort of attackers we're worried about here. One of the key things to realize, if you're just fetching a web page, in most cases they're not going to kick down your door and try to arrest you. I remember talking at the beginning of this, I was talking to computer scientists who were like, I have an algorithm for blocking Tor in China. Step 1, find 5 Tor users. Step 2, publicly kill them. Repeat until there are no more Tor users. And as a computer scientist, you're like, this is a pretty good algorithm. You're right, it seems like it would work. China walks a much finer line than that. They cannot afford to just get random people and kill them until everybody starts following everything. They will make more people angry by killing random people. They can't afford to do that. So in fact, they're quite constrained on what they're allowed to do while still keeping their power. The reason why China is doing so well right now is there are a lot of people in China who are saying, I just bought my 3rd television. This isn't so bad. And as long as those people are saying this isn't so bad, they get to stay in charge. And as soon as those people start saying, my government is censoring me, my government is doing things that a government should not be doing, then suddenly China's not in power anymore. So they have they've got a lot more constraints than they might seem. So one of them is, if you read the Wikipedia article on Tiananmen Square, they don't do anything. If you were the guy who wrote it, then yes, they get very angry. They kick down your door and disappear you. But part of the interesting thing about Tor is it's not obvious when you're watching a Tor user whether they're reading or writing on the article. It's not obvious whether they're posting a blog comment or just fetching the blog. And that means that there's a lot more cover going on. As long as, if 95% of the people in Syria are reading Facebook and 5% of the people are publishing things, then you've got a lot more people that you can blend in with than you would have if this were a Facebook publishing censorship resistance tool designed only to be given to active Syrian dissidents who need it. So another thing to keep in mind, there's economic, political, social incentives not to block the whole internet. When I started out this thing looking at China, I was thinking, so if I make China turn off their internet, do I win or did I lose? Because I don't want China to turn off the internet. And the answer is they're not going to. They cannot afford to. So if we make them do anything, they will be, the thing that they will do is to become less censoring, because that's the only direction they can go. But they don't mind collateral damage. There was actually an interesting story from India, I think 4 or 5 years ago now, where there was some website that wrote something about Pakistan, and there were a bunch of people in India who were really upset about it, and somebody in the government said, we have to censor this website because otherwise there's going to be war. Otherwise everybody's going to read it, and we're going to have too many people who are angry about too many things. So they sent out instructions to the top 6 ISPs in India saying, you have to block this blog, otherwise bad news. And the blog was a little website they hadn't heard of called Blogspot. So India ended up censoring Blogspot for a week, as I hear it. And a lot of people were angry because, you know, don't I live in a democracy? I thought we don't censor here. So I know that there's some interesting stories going on in the news right now about whether India should censor its internet. And we should definitely talk more about that afterwards, because the answer is no. So once upon a time, government firewalls didn't keep state. So in the Great Firewall of China, for example, it looks at every packet that goes past, and for every packet it has to decide whether that's a bad connection or not. So you end up getting tricks where if you're going to write Falun Gong, which is a phrase that will get censored, if you make one TCP packet that says Falun Go and another one that says Ung, it won't get censored, because they look for, in a given TCP packet, whether it has the entire phrase that they're trying to censor. Now they're buying fancier hardware. Cisco basically built the firewall for China. Now Huawei runs it, so they've got their own internal company. Cisco built the I think it was actually, I don't remember the name of it. There was some other company that built the firewall for Burma. Fortinet, that was the name. And then it was another American company that built the firewall for Burma. And now Cisco outcompeted them. Cisco offered their stuff cheaper, so now Cisco runs the firewall for Burma. And I was talking to a fellow who actually was an engineer at Fortinet a while ago, and I said, you built the firewall for Burma. And he said, no, we just sell to other American companies. We don't do bad things like this. You've got us confused. So I helped him walk through and find the picture on the internet with the Fortinet sales guy shaking hands with the guy running the Burmese junta, handing him a Fortinet box. And then he said, okay, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess we did build the censorship surveillance system for them. So in the case of Burma, the very first thing they did at the beginning of the coup was they turned off the internet. And they basically haven't turned it on since. China can't afford to do that. They've got too much going on in terms of economics to be able to turn it off. And Iran is somewhere in between. They want to leave it on most of the time because Iran has the largest population of bloggers per capita of any country. So they know what the internet is and they know what they're missing. So when you turn it off, they get angry. But Iran still turns it off when they're too scared. So they're sort of in between. So the problem here is, I started out thinking, it's me against China, I can handle this. Or it's me against Iran, I can handle this. And they won't talk to each other. But in fact, it's Cisco, it's some guy in Sunnyvale, California, who comes up with a way of censoring Tor, and then he sells it to Syria and China and Burma and all of them. So in the space of a week, they all learn how to censor Tor in a new way. So it's me against 5,000 PhDs at American companies who are just doing this because it's a fun technical thing for them to do. And that sucks. So I was talking to Whit Diffie at a conference in Australia about this, and he was saying, oh, it's very simple. What you do is you make a list of all the companies that are willing to sell their products to bad people, and you make a list of all the companies that are not willing to sell their products to bad people, and then you publicize both lists, and then let the market decide. That sounds great, but the set of companies in that second list is 0. There are no companies who will not happily sell to Syria. So I don't know what to do about that, other than trying to explain it in conferences like this, and maybe the world will change in some way. So the question from an economics perspective, is there a way to separate the arms race? So the reason why Cisco builds this, it's not because Syria pays for it. It's because Boeing pays for it. Boeing says, we want a product to keep our employees from reading news at work. And then Cisco builds it. And then Syria says, hey, can I have a copy of that? And Cisco's like, free money, we already built it, here you go. Syria by itself cannot afford to make Cisco build one of these. It's not worth it. Cisco would choose not to do it. It's because of all the other large companies out there that pay Cisco to do it that these products exist. And then they might as well sell them to other countries because free money. Their salespeople are told to sell it to anybody they can sell it to. So is there a way to separate the arms race? So Boeing ends up happy, their employees can't read news at work, but Syria ends up sad. They cannot surveil the entire network connection. I don't know if there's an answer, but it's the only direction I've thought of.
Prevention versus deterrence.
Say that again?
It's prevention versus deterrence.
It's prevention versus deterrence. Yep.
Are looking at preventive steps, right? Prevention rarely works because always the deterrence that actually prevents bad things from happening rather than prevention steps alone.
Yep.
So stopping your employees from reading news is prevention. If there was deterrence, then that wouldn't happen.
Yep. We should definitely chat more about that one afterwards. There are a lot of political pieces to that problem that make it harder than it sounds, even though it sounds hard. So other challenges. Tor is not perfect. For example, I have to assume that the users are not being attacked by their hardware and their software. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but for example, if you have spyware installed on your computer, Tor is not going to be able to keep you safe because they will watch your keystrokes. Beijing has a new law a couple of years ago that says every internet cafe seat has to have a video camera pointed at the screen, and you walk in, you give them your passport or your national ID number, they write it down, they know that this person with this national ID number was sitting at this screen, and the video camera looking at the screen knows what they were seeing. So if you're in that situation, I also cannot solve your problem. Now, I'm told it's not so bad because the first person who walks into the internet cafe in the morning reaches up and turns the video camera away, and nobody else turns it back. So that's a good way of getting around it in that case, but it's not perfect. If you're in North Korea using the internet and you're lucky enough to be one of the few people who are doing it, there's a guy with an automatic rifle standing behind you, watching you type. Tor is not going to solve that problem either. I was doing a training for a bunch of people in another East Asian country not long ago, and they were telling me some really scary stories about when I go to the bathroom, they break into my house and they answer my Skype calls. So yes, we use encryption over Skype, but we need to have some sort of protocol on top of that so that I can actually know that I'm talking to the person I hope to talk to. There's a guy across the street with a parabolic microphone listening to everything I say. So yes, I use encryption, but it still doesn't work. Or they take my laptop and install things on it and hand it back. I was talking to a nice woman in Palestine who flew to Tunisia through Tel Aviv, and they took her laptop away for 10 minutes in Tel Aviv, and they put a backdoor on it. So I'm sure they're very good at this. There are a lot of governments out there that are very good at this. The Vietnam example is an especially scary one, where they had a Windows laptop that they weren't sure if it had been backdoored or what the problem was. We couldn't find anything on it. But one day, there were 7 activists. One of them PGP encrypted mail to the other 6 of them and sent it. And the plain text of that mail was published in the national newspaper the next day. And everybody was like, oh my God, is there a mole? Is PGP broken? What's going wrong here? And it took people a long time to track it down, but it turns out that Windows, Microsoft Windows, does not come with Vietnamese keyboard driver support by default. So this means if you want to use Vietnamese with your Windows, you go to the same place everybody else goes to, you fetch the keyboard driver support, you install it. The Vietnamese Secret Service backdoored the keyboard driver support that everybody was using, which means everybody using Windows in Vietnamese was part of the Secret Service botnet. And they had enough control over it to be able to watch specific users, learn what they did, get the plain text of their mail because they could read their keystrokes. So that's an example where, again, Tor is not going to solve your problem if you have that sort of adversary. And that's really a shame because, so in the case of these Vietnam activists in particular, they had already attracted the attention of the state. There's nothing I can do at that point. Once you've got somebody watching you, guessing that you're the one they should be paying attention to, it's too late. Using Tor can't solve that problem. So part of our challenge is to get people to use Tor and start installing it and know how it works before they attract attention, because then they'll be able to stay safe. Another challenge, publicity attracts attention. So there are a lot of circumvention tools out there that say, I'm going to solve everything. This is the best circumvention tool ever. We allow completely anonymous, completely safe, completely whatever communication. And the first thing they do is they go to the New York Times and they get a front page article about how they're going to conquer India or Iran or whatever the place is that needs the safety. And the problem with that is the people who choose policy in these countries also read the New York Times. So as soon as they read the front page article, they call up the people who run the firewall and they say, hey, can you solve this new tool? I just read about it. So part of our strategy is to not have front page Wall Street Journal articles about how we are able to solve all these problems. And it's tricky because every time I go to a large conference, there's a journalist there who has flown to the conference in order to write the article, Tor Project Declares War on China. Because these newspapers, this sort of headline sells. One of the really popular ones that I spend a lot of energy trying to convince people not to write is Lone American Hacker Conquers Communist Nation. Because it's a fantastic article. Everybody wants to read it. It's really popular in the US to read about techies who take on governments. But the more articles there are like that, the less effective we can be. Because it's not like the people who run the firewall want to censor these things. It's not like they get up in the morning and they go to work and they say, what shall I censor today? They go to work and their boss tells them what to do. And they do just enough of it to keep their job and no more. So the lesson there is we can control the pace of the arms race. China only blocks tools for two reasons. One of them is they read about them in the New York Times. And the other one is they actually have millions of users. So that's part of why they're blocking Tor, because we've got too many users. But up until that point, we tried hard not to stand out, not to have anybody pay attention. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. A lot of people say, as the firewall gets more oppressive, we're going to end up with fewer Tor users because nobody's going to be willing to use it in a place that's censoring more and more. I actually think it's the opposite. As the firewall starts to censor more and more, the set of people who need to use it is going to get bigger. Because you're going to censor my pictures of kittens. And I need my pictures of kittens, so I'm going to find a tool that will show me the kittens. And as the firewall censors more and more things, the average person getting around the firewall is going to be looking at kittens. They're not going to be activists or dissidents. So I might argue that the more people start cracking down, the more ordinary it will be to be a Tor user. Hard to say. We'll find out in a few years as these things go. Trust and reputation. This goes back to the question you were asking. So there's another tool out there called FreeGate and another one called UltraSurf. They are built by people from China who are part of the Falun Gong, and they want more freedom of communication. In 2009, one of the people from the Harvard Berkman Center found a frequently asked questions list for these products. And the question was, do you sell user data? And the answer was yes, and the more you pay, the better the data is. And everybody freaked out because they're like, oh my God, why? I thought you were a circumvention tool, why aren't you keeping me safe? And the answer they gave was, well, we have to make money, which is kind of a crappy answer, but that's how it works. So one of the lessons there is a lot of these circumvention tools don't think that privacy has any role to be played. A lot of them are saying, look, I let you get to BBC. It's not up to me whether that's good or bad. Of course I'm going to give up that information. Of course they're going to learn you got to BBC. We're a circumvention tool, not an anonymity tool. Whereas in the Tor world, I believe that they have to go together. You have to provide privacy, anonymity, as well as circumvention, or it's not going to do what you want. Australia censors. England censors, Denmark censors, Sweden censors. We were talking about that before. So the problem there is that when I go to Australia and say, you guys need to stop censoring, then they say, no, 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 we're just keeping our citizens safe, just like everybody else. And that means when I go to China, I mean, I haven't done this, but if I go to China and say, you guys are a bad government because you censor the internet, their answer is, we're not a bad government. Why are you picking on us? England censors. They're not a bad government, right? So maybe, I mean, you should make everybody else stop before you make us stop. And that's really challenging because there are more and more governments out there who are setting the example that what China does is fine. And that from a policy perspective, it makes it impossible for other governments to go to China and say, actually, what you're doing is wrong. OK, so that was the next step. And do I have, how much time do I have? A half hour or an hour?
I think we have, let's see, current time looks like 12:25.
OK.
We started at 30, so you have 35.
OK, perfect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about various attacks, and we'll go from there. So in 2007, there was a guy in Sweden who was really good at manipulating the press. So he went to every journalist he could find, and he said, I broke the internet. It's great. I'm not going to tell you how I did it. So every journalist was forced to write, Swedish hacker breaks internet. Many of them wrote, brilliant Swedish hacker breaks internet, because that sells newspapers. And then a week later, he came back to them and said, I did it by running a Tor relay. And it doesn't use encryption, so I just watch what people do. And apparently, he ended up with a list of usernames and passwords to a bunch of embassies. He had a lot of logins to the Pakistani embassy and the Indian embassy and the Iranian embassy, and a lot of passwords that maybe he should not have gotten. And on the one hand, that's really cool that some technical person in these organizations said, if you're a diplomat to my country and you are traveling abroad, you need to use Tor to be safe. Because if you just walk into the Starbucks in Washington, D.C., there are 5 diplomats in the Starbucks, and they're all watching each other's traffic to figure out what they're saying and who they're saying it to. So using Tor in this situation is really good. On the other hand, they didn't use POP-S or IMAP-S. They did not use SSL for collecting their email, and that means that it was possible to watch it. So the lesson is, whatever you would do in Starbucks to be safe with your traffic, you need to do over Tor also. Another lesson is Tor hides your location. It provides anonymity. It does not magically encrypt all the traffic on the internet. And it's a bit more confusing because it does provide encryption locally. So for example, when I go to DEF CON or a hacker conference like that, and I'm logging into my E-Trade account, my bank account, I'm going to use Tor because I am shifting the risk away from the local network, which is very high risk, onto some random stranger somewhere in the world, and hopefully he's not as much of a risk as the DEF CON local network is. So it really depends what your threat model is, what is dangerous here. But it gets more complex than that. The problem here is none of the websites want to offer HTTPS because they claim that it's too slow or too expensive. So when you talk, for example, a lot of the websites that people worry about most use companies like Akamai to accelerate their web services so that there's caching all over. Akamai charges a lot more to provide HTTPS, so nobody does it. And that means that if, for example, FBI.gov uses Akamai, so they don't use SSL because they didn't pay for that. Maybe we should refuse to handle requests to port 23, which is Telnet, or 109, 110, which are POP, 143 is IMAP. Maybe things that are typically used unencrypted, we should refuse to handle. There are a couple of research groups who log in over Tor to their unencrypted IMAP server, and then they watch to see who else logs in. And they send a different username and password from each exit relay. And so they know if this one is reused, then that exit relay learned about it. But maybe that's because the exit relay is bad, or maybe because their upstream is bad, or maybe they're in a country that watches these things. It's really hard to know who to blame. And it's trickier than that. I was talking during the break. So a while ago, Gmail, when you log into your Gmail account over SSL, they give you a cookie. And the cookie, your browser will send it whether you're going to HTTPS Gmail or HTTP Gmail. Google solved this by, when you set the cookie, you can set the SSL only bit on it, which means that your browser will only send the cookie on SSL connections. But Facebook doesn't set that bit. They say, well, we want our users to be able to reach our website. So the answer is, you log into Facebook over SSL. If you ever are convinced by your browser to do an HTTP request, then you will send your Facebook cookie, and they can grab it and use it. And there are documents and cases of the government of Tunisia and the government of Syria grabbing people's Facebook cookies off the wire and logging in after them in order to organize a protest or something that actually the government is making a trick out of. In Tunisia, they actually logged in after people and got a list of their social networks. So it's a real challenge here to get the world to switch to SSL. OK, so another question. Who runs the relays? Are they good guys? Are they bad guys? Every once in a while, I find a computer security hacker expert who says, I know that China runs one of the relays. And so I say, which one? And I say, oh, I don't know. And he answers, I don't know. So nobody knows which one, but they know that China runs one. The goal of Tor is to have distributed trust. So it doesn't matter if China runs one of them. But what happens if they run 10 of them or 100 of them? Once upon a time, at the very beginning, you had to send me email and say, hey, Roger, I'm that guy that you met at the conference. You convinced me. Here's the relay. I've set it up. And then I would manually add your relay to the directory. That scaled even less well than I thought it would, because the goal of the Tor network is a diverse set of relays. So when I get mail from the guy in Russia or Brazil saying, I want to run a relay, if I say no, the Tor network ends up being 6 guys at Harvard and 4 guys at MIT and a couple of other people, and it's a very small network. So I need to say yes to the people I've never met, but there's a direct contradiction there. So there are a bunch of people who study bot networks. There's a guy at Georgia Tech, for example, who studies botnets, and he has a list of 1 million bots that he can control. And every time I talk to him, he says, hey, Roger, with one command, I can sign up 100,000 new Tor relays. What happens when I run that command? And the only answer I have for him is, please don't. Because how am I going to tell the difference between a nice person volunteering a relay and a bad guy volunteering a bot-run relay? And if you sign them all up at once, we'll notice. But if you sign them up a few at a time, how can I tell the difference? And there were spikes in the graph of relays that I showed you. For example, when the Egypt thing was happening, we got 500 relays that week. If you're a bad guy, you wait for a week like that, and you sign up a couple hundred relays. And it just looks like you're doing it because of the news, but actually you're taking advantage of the news to attack us. What if your exit relay that you happen to choose is running Windows, and it runs some sort of Norton antivirus or something, so it changes the websites that people get? So you end up using Tor from some normal place, but because the exit relay is messing with the traffic, you get a different answer. A more extreme version of that, we were looking at whether SSL handshakes were getting man-in-the-middled by Tor exit relays, and we found one in China that was SSL man-in-the-middling all of the connections. So you are in Kansas using Tor, you pop out of China, and it censors you, or it man-in-the-middles you, or whatever it does inside China. And we thought at first, oh my God, we found a bad relay. We found a relay that's attacking people. It turns out it wasn't the relay. It was the ISP in China that was attacking all of its customers in China. And because you were a Tor user popping out as one of the customers in China, you got surveilled and censored just like the people in China did. So that was a fun example where we actually saw a case of a Chinese ISP man-in-the-middling all of its users. But if you have a Tor relay in that situation, it gets censored. It gets even more confusing. One day, a group of 10 fast relays showed up on 149.9.something.something. We had no idea who it was. The relay operator did not set their contact info, so we had no idea. You could do a whois on the IP address, and it would show you PSINet. So I have a friend who knows everybody in the ISP industry, so I had him call up the PSINet people and say, who runs those IP addresses? Who did you give them to? And the answer from the PSINet people was, oh, wow, those are our addresses. They weren't in any of our databases. Thanks, we'll look into it, which is pretty scary. And it turns out that we do know who they were, and they're nice, friendly people who wanted to help out and make the Tor network better. But it sure looks scary when 10 Washington, D.C. area anonymous Tor relays all show up at the same time. So we have a few fixes. If there are two relays that are coming from the same nearby IP space, you'll never use more than one of them in a given circuit. So you would never build a circuit that was through all of these in Washington, D.C. But that's not perfect, because there are these things called autonomous systems that are basically at the ISP level numbers. And for example, there's a place in Germany called that's an internet exchange where a lot of different ISPs all go into the same building. And if I can surveil the traffic in that building, I can see a lot more of the Tor traffic, of the Tor network, than I had hoped you could. So the extreme example of that, when I make gestures about using the Tor network and I say bouncing around the Tor network, what I should be saying is bouncing around the Tor network back and forth over AT&T. And if that's true, if the topology of the network is such that there are bottleneck ISPs that can watch a lot of the network, then we're really not as diverse and dispersed as we thought we were. So there are a bunch of other application level things to worry about. So for example, let's say you're using your browser, you're connecting it through Tor, so it's proxying through Tor. You go to a website, it gives you a JavaScript. What the JavaScript does is every 60 seconds it does a reload. So you use Tor successfully, you're all safe, and then a while later you turn Tor off, the JavaScript timer happens, you do a reload, and suddenly you go there directly. So now you are de-anonymized. And there are a lot of other application things like cookies and history. Every time you go to a website using Internet Explorer, you tell that website how many pixels by how many pixels your browser window is. Just automatically you tell them every time. And that's a great tracking mechanism. It's a great way to recognize you. Even if you're using Tor, they can still say, oh, that's the guy who prefers Japanese and has a browser size this big and so on. So we have a Firefox extension called Tor Button that tries to solve a lot of things like that. But it's actually worse than that. Did you know that Microsoft Word is a network application? If I embed an image link with enough backslashes into it, it turns into a NetBIOS call that just bypasses all the proxy settings. So you can use Tor safely. You download a doc file. You click on the doc file, and somehow we need to proxy the doc file's network interactions in order to be able to keep you safe. So the very short lesson is, if you're on Linux or BSD, there are one-liners to change the IP table rules or the firewall rules to proxy everything into Tor, so that there's no concept of a connection going out through your computer that doesn't go through Tor. If you're on Windows, you're screwed. Unfortunately, basically all the people in the world are on Windows. Basically all the people in the world are screwed. That's not great. Okay, so those were some of the practical side of attacks. Let's think a little bit more about the theory side, the research side. So the biggest attack is traffic confirmation. If you can see the traffic flow going into the Tor network and also out of the Tor network, then you can line it up. And it's actually more complex than that. So there are a bunch of people who are saying, let's come up with some sort of padding scheme or delaying scheme or batching scheme in a way that is able to defend against this traffic confirmation attack. So one of the Tor researchers wrote a paper in 2007 where he said internet exchanges don't get to record all the traffic that they see because they have too much going on. They've got 100 gigabit links. So they only get to see 1 in 2,000 packets. So he said, I'm going to build a traffic confirmation attack that only gets to see 0.5% of the packets, 0.05% of the packets on one side, and 0.05% of the packets on the other side. And his attack worked great. The intuition is when the traffic starts over here, it will start soon after over here. Even if you're missing most of the packets, you can still see beginning of flow matches up with beginning of flow, and end of flow matches up with end of flow. So even if you only get to see 1 in 2,000 packets, you can still do traffic confirmation very well. So there are a bunch of papers out there that try to make things safer. None of them are actually known to be good. So my assumption is that the problem cannot be solved. But this is a great problem from the research side. There's a paper called Traffic Morphing that was at NDSS last year. Vitaly Shmatakov has some papers. There are a bunch of people working on this. Nobody has solved it. So if you're looking for a hard research problem, we've got one. So Tor safety, in the academic world, Tor came out of the literature called mixed networks. And the idea for a mixed network is it's a high latency system where a bunch of people send email messages in, they wait for 30 minutes, they get batched and sent out, and the goal of a mix is somebody watching the traffic coming in can't match up the traffic coming out. But because Tor wants to be fast, we need to get the bytes from one end to the other quickly, we cannot solve the traffic confirmation attack. So I'm coming to believe that the security properties that Tor provides are actually different than the ones that everybody had hoped that they would provide. So the first type of diversity, the first type of security we have in Tor is the diversity of the relays. The more diverse the locations of the relays are relative to the attackers, the harder it is to be in the right places, the beginning and the end, in order to win. So one of the research problems we have right now is how much diversity is there? Let's say we think about it in terms of entropy. So we say, what's the probability distribution of entry points in the network, and what's the entropy of that? And what's the probability distribution of exit points, and what's the entropy of that? And nobody's even graphed that, so I don't have any idea. For example, when the Egypt thing happened and we got 500 new relays, did the Tor network actually get safer? Did we get more entropy, more diversity? I don't know the answer. And then the second piece is diversity of users and reasons to use it. If the Tor network were only used by Iranian dissidents, then the fact that you have it installed is really dangerous. If the Tor network were only used by cancer survivors, then everybody knows why you're using it, and maybe it doesn't provide the security that you were hoping it would. So those are sort of the two directions to reason about in terms of safety. Website fingerprinting. If you can see an SSL encrypted link, you can guess which web page they are fetching. Even though it's encrypted, you can say, well, they made a request and they got 40 kilobytes back. They made another request and they got 20 kilobytes back. Which websites match this profile? And this attack works great on SSL because it doesn't pad. Tor pads a little bit because it sends cells in 512-byte chunks. So there's some padding going on, but it turns out that website fingerprinting works pretty well against Tor. So all of this multi-hop stuff and all this distributed trust stuff, so what? If I can watch Alice's local network, I can guess which web page she's fetching, and even easier than that, I can rule out some of the web pages. I can say the profile of bytes that she received makes it clear that she did not fetch anything from this website. So that's scary, and people don't really understand how bad it can be. Long-term passive attacks. So let me back up a little bit. Let's imagine you build a circuit through the Tor network. You don't want to keep using that circuit forever, because if you do that, then you're going to be building a profile at the exit relay. I don't know who this anonymous person is, but they have fetched this page and that page and that page. And if any of the pages you fetch identify you, then they can link them with all the previous pages that you fetched. So you really want to be changing your circuit periodically. If I can make you make a new circuit, and I run 2 of the relays in the network, so I'm building a new circuit every 10 minutes or something, the probability that I eventually pick your relay for the first one and your relay for the last one, eventually the probability that will happen goes up to 1. The more circuits I make, the more dangerous, the more risk I have, the more exposure I have to your relays. So the fix for that is what we call guard nodes. The idea is that Alice, the Tor client, is going to choose a couple of relays and always use them for her first hop. So if she chooses the bad guy's relays, she's screwed. She's screwed for basically everything. But if she doesn't, she's never screwed, because the first hop is always controlled by somebody who's not the bad guy, and he's never able to learn that it was this user connecting to that website. Congestion attacks. So in 2005, there was a fun paper where the researcher said, I'm going to build a circuit from me to the relay and back. And actually, if there are 100 relays, I will build 100 circuits. So I will be sending constant rate traffic through all 100 of the circuits. And then Alice, my target user, will make a connection to the website, and I'm going to dump a very large file on her, producing congestion load in the network. And now I've got all these little testing circuits. Whichever testing circuit slows down, it slowed down because that was the circuit that was used in Alice's connection. So you can remotely figure out which relays are in use on a given circuit for a given user. And that's really scary. I mean, it's not as bad as it could be. You can learn Alice's relays, but you can't learn who Alice is. So then there are variations that make the attack work better. So Nick Hopper in 2007 had a fun attack based on latency, where he said, step 1, do the attack I just described to learn who the relays are. Step 2, build your own circuit in parallel to those same relays, and then send traffic through the same relays, and you can learn the latency from you to the first hop, and the latency from you to the website, and then you can do the math to learn the latency from the first hop to your target user. So because of this congestion attack, I can learn that Alice, whoever she is 80 milliseconds away from this IP address. Is that scary? There isn't really a map of latency internet topology out there, but it's certainly more information than I was hoping you'd be able to get about Alice. And if you can do the attack a second time, then you can start to triangulate her. You can start to say, whoever she is, she's 80 milliseconds from this IP address, and 160 milliseconds from this IP address, and 800 milliseconds from this IP address. There aren't that many places on the internet that match that sort of thing. So maybe you can narrow her down and say, I'm pretty sure that she's in Chennai, for example. I don't know what ISP, but maybe that's bad enough. And then there are some other variations that make it even worse. Another challenge that we have. So let's imagine I'm on the adversary's network. So he gets to watch what I'm doing. He sees me connecting to a relay that he doesn't control, so he kills that connection. My Tor client now has a choice. Does it stop? Does it fail? Can I not use Tor? Or does it try a different one? So it tries a different one, and the adversary says, I can't control that one either, I'm going to cut it. So eventually, it tries one the adversary wanted me to try, and now he owns my first hop. And from there, we repeat, where I try to extend from that hop to a relay, and he says, nope, that one doesn't work. And I try a different one, nope, that doesn't work. And eventually, I choose one that he allows me to use, so I'm building a circuit that the adversary controls every hop of. That's not good. So we have a usability problem here, because I can't tell the difference between the adversary running one of these attacks and me being on a firewalled or flaky network connection. So what do? Do I pop up a little warning for the user saying, warning, it looks like you might be under attack, or maybe your network is down, or maybe your network doesn't work very well, or maybe you're in Tunisia and you're censored, or maybe click OK. That's not going to solve the problem. So how do we explain to the user so they can choose what to do? Or how do we automate the decision? So the lesson here is pretty much any Tor bug that we find turns into an anonymity attack. As soon as I can do some sort of bug that distinguishes, that partitions the user base from one group to another group, then I can start to say, well, you're the user who didn't have that bug, and you're the user who did have that bug. And suddenly we start learning more about the users than I expected to, or than I hoped we would be able to. Another lesson is these various attacks work against Tor. They're pretty esoteric. They're pretty complex attacks. They work even better against all the other tools out there. So I don't want you to come away from this saying, Tor is broken, there are 8 attacks that work against it. You should use something else. Instead, low latency anonymity systems are flawed in ways that open research has not answered yet. So there are ways of attacking anything like Tor, and we don't have good answers for them. Okay, so I've got 10-ish minutes left. I'm going to zip through a couple of more slides, and then maybe I'll take some questions at the end. So we've got the bandwidth question. Okay. There are a bunch of performance issues here in terms of why Tor is slow today. The first reason is not enough capacity. We need more relays. So if you want to make the Tor network better, you're at a university, you're in the perfect place to run a relay or 2 or 5 or 10 and provide more capacity to the network. The second problem is some people run BitTorrent over Tor. So somebody did a study recently where they said the average byte sent over the Tor network is file sharing, and the average connection made over the Tor network is web browsing. So we're actually quite similar to the whole internet in general, where people generally web browse, but if you're looking at it from a bandwidth perspective, people generally file share. And that's true over Tor. And the problem there is the guy who's trying to download a movie over Tor, he doesn't care how long it takes. He doesn't care what the latency is. But the guy in Syria who's trying to get to Twitter, he does care what the latency is. So the guy who's downloading the movie is ruining Tor for the guy who's trying to get to Twitter. That's not good. We also have some networking performance problems. One of the ways that we can solve this, there are 2 papers recently on Tor network simulators. There's one called Experimentor, and there's one called Shadow. And you can basically, if you have a computer with hundreds of gigabytes of RAM, you can start up 500 Tor relays and 2,000 Tor users, and you can actually simulate how changes in the algorithm would work. So another thing we have to think about, I mentioned bridges. I talked about bridges in terms of we need to get lots of addresses, but what we really want is churn of addresses over time. So we've got a couple of building blocks here. The first building block is the bridge should measure how much use it sees from each country. So for example, a bridge should say, I was seeing lots of use from Iran, and now I'm seeing no use from Iran. Maybe Iran censored me. That's the first building block we need. The second building block is some way to do reachability testing for bridges. So right now, if a bridge gets blocked inside China, I can't tell that it got blocked. I can look at the statistics that it publishes, and maybe it'll go from lots of users to 0 users. But if it goes from 4 users to 2 users, did it get blocked, or did 2 people just go to sleep? So the big picture goal here is I would like to come up with other bridge distribution strategies. I would like to be able to give out bridge addresses to people in a way that the people who are good at giving them to people who don't get them blocked get more addresses. And if every time I give you a bridge address, for some reason it gets blocked, I should stop giving you more. And the goal of this would be to come up with some sort of automated feedback mechanism where you can sign up to say, I want to give out bridges, and I give you a few, and if it works, if those bridges see a lot of use and they don't get censored, I automatically give you more because you're good at this. And if it doesn't work, either they get blocked or nobody ends up using them, then I don't give you more because you're not good at this. So one of the research challenges is how do we end up coming up with new tricks to give bridge addresses to the good guys without letting the bad guys learn all of them. And traffic camouflaging is another big piece. If Iran and China are actually working on deep packet inspection, we need to not look like SSL. And we don't want to look like Skype because they already put millions of dollars into learning how to block Skype. One of the fun things about Dubai, for example, they censor Skype, not because they're scared people are going to use it to talk about bad things, but because the monopoly telephone company in Dubai wants to be the only place that you make long-distance telephone calls through. So they only censor Skype as an economic thing, but if we try to look like Skype, then they're going to try to censor us anyway. So we need to figure out how to look like new protocols in a way that nobody wants to censor us. And then from a metrics side, can we come up with obfuscation metrics that if I give you 5 transports, one of them looks like SSL, one of them looks like Skype, one of them looks like nothing, one of them looks like something else, which one is better? How do I measure quality of obfuscation? And I'm going to call it quits here because I've got 5 minutes for questions. And I'm also going to be around for the rest of the day and hopefully future days. I should be easy to spot. I'm wearing a bright green Tor t-shirt, and I'm a tall white guy, so I don't think I blend in very well. But questions, comments, thoughts?
Applause. Yeah, so are there questions?
Can you ask that again? What's the, I didn't understand the question.
Can I learn about the Tor device in the network?
Ah.
So that if there is somebody who is actually using it, I can use it.
Not easily. So the problem that we have from an anonymity perspective is we want every user to have the same view of the network. Because if I have a set of relays and you have a different set of relays, and the adversary is watching what relays I'm using, then they can start to partition me. So from an anonymity perspective, we need everybody to have the same view of the network, which means we don't want to have you just automatically recognize and learn about relays and use them.
So, is client decide which relay to use or network decide which relays to use?
The client decides. The client has to decide. If the network decides what the relays will be, then the first relay you choose can build the rest of your path for you, and then he gets to learn what you're doing. So
Client can decide which exit relay to be in China, or maybe to be in India, or maybe to be in...
yes, yeah. And in fact, there are a lot of users who say, I want to build a path that comes out of England so I can read BBC without getting advertisements. Because apparently England puts advertisements in everything unless you're inside England, and then it doesn't. Or I want to come out of the US because I want to listen to Pandora radio, and they only let me do that if I'm there. And I'm not really sure what I think about this, because my goal is to give you a network for safety, not a network for getting around country-level filtering. But, yes. There's no registering. You get the software, you get a list of the relays, and then you connect to any relay you like, and you do a handshake with it and establish a key, and it works. If we had registering, then that would be bad news for anonymity.
It works on which layer of
I can't hear you.
which application layer it works?
Which application layer does it work at? TCP. So the Tor client builds a TCP connection to the first hop. The first hop builds a different TCP connection to the second hop, and then another one, and so on. So you can think of it like a TCP proxy, a multi-tier TCP proxy. So what actually gets sent from Alice to the exit relay is the actual text of the TCP connection. So for example, get/index.html gets sent from Alice to the exit relay. There are alternate designs where they actually wrap up the TCP packets on Alice's network, and they send them to the exit relay, who then puts them back on the network. And there are a couple of problems with that. The biggest problem is different TCP stacks build their packets in different ways. So if I'm the website and I see a TCP packet that Alice built, I can say, Alice is running Windows 2003 server version this. And that makes her stand out in the same way that a browser cookie would make her stand out. So we could fix that by shipping a user space TCP stack with every Tor client so that it will build the packets the way that everybody else does. If there were a user space secure, maintainable, portable, open, free TCP stack, we might do that. Turns out there's a fellow over here who's been building one that might serve, and I should talk to him more about that.
More questions?
Do we get to know the location of the first relay that we choose while connecting it in the client?
Can the client learn the location of the first relay? Yes. In fact, the client knows the IP addresses of all the relays. And we ship a GeoIP database with all the Tors. And that means, for example, you can say, I never want a relay inside Tunisia. And you can configure that. And then your Tor client will get the big list and say, this one's in Tunisia, I'm not going to use it. And maybe that's a good idea, maybe it's a bad idea. I talk to conspiracy theory people who say, I never want to use a Tor relay in Germany or the US, but they just cut out 80% of the network. So the question then, if your adversary is Germany, you should never use a relay in Germany. But if your adversary knows that you will never use a relay in Germany, and they see you building a circuit that never involves German relays, then they're going to say, oh, that's the guy who's avoiding German relays. So you actually stand out even more by avoiding the relays that you're worried about. And that's because every user needs to build a path using the same input, or you'll end up being that guy who never uses relays in Germany. So there's a trade-off there that we need to research more. It works fine if you say, I don't want to use relays in Tunisia because there basically aren't any. It's much scarier if you say, I don't ever want to use relays in Europe or North America, because then you'll be stuck using the relays in India if you guys set them up. Otherwise, there won't be much to choose from. Enough? Is it that the people running the firewalls don't want to do it? Is it that they don't have the infrastructure support to be able to censor these things that much? I remember talking to a fellow who worked at Cisco long ago, and he was like employee number 8 at Cisco, and he was telling me a fun story about the day they got the tech support call from China, because China called them and said, my Cisco router keeps crashing, and it turns out that's because they put 2 million IP addresses in the blacklist, and it was doing a linear search to decide for each packet whether it should allow that packet through. And so the answer there is you can't. For that version of the Cisco product, they fixed it after that because their customers wanted to be able to censor things faster. But at that point, you couldn't censor that many IP addresses. So maybe Libya can't afford to put these IP addresses in their censorship system. It's an unstable situation because they should just go to Nokia and say, hey, can I buy one of those? And then they can. But yes, the answer is bridge addresses, which we changed the arms race from how do we give you a public list and make you unable to block it, to how do I take this list of secret addresses and give them out to the people who need them without letting the bad guys learn all of them. And that turns out to be a harder problem than I thought, but still easier than the first one.
Okay. If there are no additional questions for the moment, then we have two things to do. First of all, I should announce that the lunch break will be until 2:30, so be back here at 2:30 for the next tutorial. And secondly, I should turn over the microphone.
So, I would like to thank Roger on behalf of organizers and on behalf of Cryptology Research Society. And here is a small memento.
Thank you. And I'll be wandering around, and I'm happy to talk to you about any Tor questions. That's why I'm here. So if you have any more thoughts, no question is too dumb. Thank you.